In 2008, Americans voted for change. In 2010, Americans voted for change. What is in store for 2012? Conservatives have won a battle, but have they won the war? Welcome to Vantage Point.
Vantage Point is brought to you by American Vision. For more information on today's show, check out God and Government, the 3-volume series by Gary DeMar. You will find it at AmericanVision.com.
Okay, Gary DeMar, Joel McDermott, let's weigh in on the topic of the election results.
Well, I think your opening comment was exactly on the money, and that this was simply a battle. And I remember 1980, you guys were, as old as probably some
couldn't
of
vote.
Yeah, couldn't vote. You were too young. I remember.
We were Democrats, we could vote.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, that's right. Because you weren't born.
That's right.
You were. How old were you in 1980?
7.
You were 7. I remember going down. Larry McDonald was a congressman here in the 7th District of Georgia. He was the one who was shot down in that 007 Korean flight. He was probably one of the most conservative congressmen in there. He and Dr. Ron Paul were both called Dr. No because they were both medical doctors. Oftentimes you'd have votes and there'd be 2 no's, Larry McDonald and Ron Paul. And I remember in 1980, we had a similar type bloodbath. Ronald Reagan came in and Republicans, conservatives came in on the coattails of Ronald Reagan. And I remember going to the motel where Larry McDonald was holding an after-election party, and everybody was cheering and so forth. We took this guy down, we took that guy down. Here we are, 30 years later, and we have probably the most liberal person in the White House, and still a very liberal Congress, and also Republicans who really aren't conservatives. They're only, like I called them, Republicans in name only. In 1980, we thought we had won a war. In reality, we simply won a battle. And we went home after that. We still did some things and so forth. We have to continue on in the same sort of fever pitch that we have now. We have to continue that on through 2012, 14, 16, 18, 20, all the way down the line.
There are 2 important parallels between what happened then, when I was 6 years old, and in this election. And the first one was one of Reagan's campaign promises was to balance the budget, reduce the deficit.
And to abolish the Department of Education.
Well, I was going to get there.
Yeah.
You jumped on me too quick there. Well, the first one he never accomplished. And I think the other one was not his promise, it was more Congress's promise. Maybe it was his too, I don't remember. To abolish the Department of Education. Well, you have exact same 2 issues now, except instead of Department of Education, it's this new health care promise. And you have Republicans now saying, we got to reduce deficits, we got to get out of control spending in control, which means nothing. You're basically trusting the same people to control what they're saying is out of control, and they're the ones that got it out of control to begin with. And then you got the Obamacare. Well, now they're saying we're going to repeal Obamacare. And of course, the situation is the same. There's no way they'll get it to pass the Senate, and even if they do, they'll get it to Obama's desk and he'll veto it. So from my perspective, nothing's going to change on that front. They may be able to vote to defund it, but there will be issues there because they'll want to continue funding the war, and the Democrats will not give what support they need to give to fund the war if they don't have some give and take there. So I don't see much going to change here. As far as have we won a war, I'm skeptical, not yet cynical, but definitely skeptical because of those 2 issues. We've seen it before, and really I could go back to the origins of the United States, went on the Continental Congress, and repeat the same theme a dozen times through American history. There's this continual ratcheting effect of taking away our liberties. There's a continual outcry on whoever the conservatives are at the time saying, we're going to repeal this, we're going to take it back. They get in power, it doesn't happen, and the next generation goes on. And it keeps on going. So I'm skeptical.
Yeah, because we have to remember when Social Security was implemented, there was a great deal of heat and ink spilled over the institution of Social Security. It was tied in. People saw it as really as a fascist type program. Otto von Bismarck had proposed it. Adolf Hitler had picked it up, and he ran with it. You can read about this in The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich by William L. Shirer. So there was a great deal of rhetoric over that and electioneering over it. And now Social Security is, I mean, you know, don't touch my Social Security. You know, let's abolish Obamacare. You know, don't cut my Social Security. Don't cut my Medicare.
Sure. I've paid into the system. By golly, I'm going to get it back out.
Yeah.
Well, some people are not going to get it back out. One of these days, the checks are going to bounce, and that's going to be that.
So what's the long-term solution?
Well, I think you continue to keep hammering about these issues, and I think you use these types of elections in the enthusiasm for it to keep getting more and more conservative candidates. Okay, you had Ron Paul, now you got Rand Paul, his son, in there
In the Senate, and that's no small thing.
and that was really unexpected. These off presidential election years are really the best time to get conservatives in, because most people's attention isn't on these types of off presidential year elections. This is my criticism of the third party people back in 2008 who jumped all over me because I wouldn't support their presidential candidate that no one had ever heard about. The guy had never even run for a political office. We got into this mess over a long period of time in short steps. We're going to get out of it in the same way. I don't think there's going to be a radical shift in American politics. There has to be a change in knowledge and understanding, which we know that isn't the case. Our emails bear that out,
Yes.
and comments to our articles bear that out. We have a long way to go, but you go back 60 or 70 years when the progressives were there, they didn't see it. They didn't see it taking place in their lifetime. They were forward enough thinking to see that they could get it 70 or 80 years in the future. We just got to have that long-term mentality.
That's why I brought up this idea of a ratcheting effect. There's always this little bit of a turn, tightening, like a boa constrictor kills its prey. Every time it takes a breath, it squeezes a little tighter every time it exhales, and so it can't breathe more. But it's just gradual. And the left, or I should say the statists, because it was the Republicans originally, from Lincoln forward, who had this long-term agenda. They knew they weren't going to change things overnight, but they began to put the things in place that would give them the power tomorrow and the next generation and the generation after that to complete this long-term agenda, which is, controlled by the state. And as long as people do not get educated, as long as people do not get a vision for a decentralized government and independence and things like that, it's never going to change. It will never change, because as long as people have a dependence on government or would rather be paid by the government via tax money or whatever plan, as long as people look at politics as a way to get their own interests fulfilled at the expense of who cares who else's, then it will never change, because the politicians will keep making the promises, they'll keep getting the votes based on those kind of promises, and the situation will continue to ratchet until there's going to be a culmination point. Who knows when it is? There will be a point sometimes when all those promises and the checks behind those promises bounce.
Right.
And I think saying all this, I mean, it was a dramatic election night. The numbers are staggering. I mean, the Republicans picked up anywhere from 61 to 65 seats as we're giving this. This is what, November 8th, that we're talking about this. There's still a number of Republican seats that are still in process. There's still one senatorial seat in Alaska.
Governors picked up.
The governors and the state houses. I mean, I was reading there are a couple of state houses. New York, for example, they're still counting in three elections. If the Republicans pick up 2, they actually get the state. They get the state house in New York. And Joel, we were commenting earlier about the spread across the country of where political power is concentrated.
Yeah.
And you see it on the coasts. I mean, California was a disaster for the Republicans in most cases. Mm-hmm. In New York, I mean, the gubernatorial candidate that they had there was really not. I mean, he wasn't the best guy that they could have put up. Mm-hmm. But it is hard in some of those states. But those are the centers that are really guiding. That's where the media and the entertainment businesses are solidified. And so we're being pummeled by the two coasts in terms of popular culture and also in political persuasion.
Yeah, well, you take a state like New York, or I like to use Illinois as an example, where most of the state is rural, most of the people have traditional Christian values, most of the people believe in our constitutional rights, right to bear arms and things like that, but the state of Illinois has some of the worst gun laws in the country as far as restrictions. And why is that? It's because population and political power is concentrated in one urban center, and you might say too, Mount Vernon, I guess, is the capital, but mostly in Chicago, the whole Obama Chicago Realpolitik Center. And it's why is it that such a small concentration of people have the right to make policy for an entire geographical district the size of the state of Illinois? And that's just one example. You can go to pretty much every state in the country.
Yeah, Pennsylvania is the same. We've got Pittsburgh and Philadelphia.
Yeah. Why is that? And why do we have a system that rewards the highly condensed population centers with political power and not the people who want to live and mind their own business in rural areas? Why do we have to sell out our rights to those people?
It's like the old Greek view of democracy, just counting noses rather than having a representative form of government.
Right, and I think it's a consequence of centralizing power at larger and larger levels rather than having a system that rewards decentralized power. And of course, it goes also back to what I was saying earlier. If people don't get a vision for independence and decentralized government, then they're never going to fight for it. They're going to keep thinking that by taking the seats over in Washington, somehow we're winning a victory, when in reality, you're just throwing one rascal out and putting another rascal in his place for the most part.
One of the things that has not been talked about very much about this particular election is that is the census. We were all very critical of the census and the way it was handled and the way the left tends to use the census. But now, because of the governorships in these states, redistricting now starts taking place, and now whoever's in charge of the state ends up determining how the new districts are going to be drawn based upon the census. Happens every 10 years. And we think about New York. We talked about these different population centers. There's one particular district up in Upper New York where you have two liberal cities, and they've tied this district together. I think it's called the Slaughter Rule, because this Louise Slaughter has been representative there for years. And so these two cities are bound together by a very thin strip in order to create one particular district. Because if the center, in fact, had been pulled out and put into a different district, it would all change. Well, if this changes in New York, we're going to see that particular district completely go away. So there are lots of interesting factors here, but we have to keep on plugging away. We won one battle, and I don't know how well we won it, based upon a lot of things that Joel had to say here. We need to do what the left has done, and that is bit by bit, take back this claimed property until we bring back the focus on where things ought to be, a decentralized view of government. This is why I'm coming out with a new edition of my book, the God and Government series, that understands government, that is not solely political, includes the individual and self-government, family government, church government, and civil government. And you can't change the government at the top until you change government at the bottom, and that means it begins with us.
Well said. Thank you for joining us on Vantage Point. Send your questions to vantagepoint@americanvision.org. Thank you.
For more information on today's show, check out God and Government. In this 3-book series, Gary DeMar introduces you to America's true history, discussing the influence of Christianity upon the founding and development of America. He presents a practical approach to developing a biblical perspective of the elements of society, challenging us to re-implement the values and priorities that made America great. Its factual documentation makes it ideal for Christians seeking to discover the truth of America's heritage. You will find this great work at AmericanVision.com.